here we go. Hello, my name is Shauna Hirschfield. I am Hamilton College class of 2006. I work for the Career Center. Just last year, we launched the Hamilton Career Network, which is an initiative to help alumni connect with other alumni and with students and with community members around their career interests. So we're really thrilled to have you all here tonight. Thanks for joining us. We have a great schedule of other events taking place, so please, if you haven't already, check out our alumni events page to see what else we have on the docket for the next several months. For those of you who have joined us for past events, you know the drill. I'm going to run through a few of the mechanics before we jump into the formal content of the program. First of all, you should have been muted automatically when you joined the room, but you have full audio and video privileges, so feel free to unmute yourself and jump into the conversation as you'd like to. I will also be monitoring the chat window as the event goes on, so if you have questions, feel free to type them there. And we will also have a formal Q&A section at the end of the event, so feel free to jump more into the conversation during that point as well. Again, to do so, you can type into the chat, or you can use the raise your hand feature, or just unmute yourself to join into the conversation. Another quick note of business is if folks could please rename themselves to be their first and their last name so that we know who's here in the room. That would be really helpful. To do so, you can just hover over your picture, click on the three little dots and say rename, and then you can enter your name so that we know who's here with us tonight. All right, we are ready to begin. Mike Singer, who is class of 2009, and Julianne Jackwith, who's class of 2008, are our Hamilton Career Network Government and Law lead and vice lead. They helped coordinate this event tonight, so thank you to you both for your efforts to make tonight possible. I'm going to hand it over to Jules to introduce our panelists and to get things rolling.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shauna. And thank you everyone for being here. You know, for being such a kind of a young program to have this all be in a virtual format. It's really encouraging to see so many people here turning out to participate in these events. I should introduce myself. I'm Julianne Jackwith. I am class of 2008. And I'm the vice chair of the Law and Government Career Network. And thank you so much to the Hamilton Career Network for sponsoring this event and for keeping these events running smoothly in this unusual time. We hope to have further in-person events soon, but for the time being, our events are going to be virtual, and we have a great calendar of events coming up in the next few months. So keep an eye and ear out for those. So on to tonight's panel. We have three spectacular panelists and a moderator. And this subject matter was particularly of interest and important to me as a former law student and law grad. I think, you know, public service is such a diverse field, and in helping people pursue careers in public service, they need to know what public service is, the scope of public service, and the breadth of opportunities that there are available in public service. So I'm going to turn it over to Silvia and allow her to introduce our wonderful panelists this evening.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining. Tonight, we have a panel of three remarkably accomplished Hamilton alums, and I very much look forward to hearing what they have to say. Sean Delany, class of 1975, is the former executive director of the Lawyers Alliance for New York, an adjunct professor at NYU Law. He also served as the Assistant Attorney General in charge of the Charities Bureau in the Office of the New York Attorney General. And currently, Mr. Delany is self-employed, assisting nonprofits facing regulatory challenges. Beth Coombe, class of 1989, is the first Assistant United States Attorney for the Northern District of New York. Prior to this position, she was the Chief of the Criminal Division for NDNY, and she was the first woman to ever hold that position. And Tracee Plowell, class of 1995, is Senior Litigation Counsel at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and she is the former Assistant Chief for the U.S. Department of Justice Criminal Division in D.C. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. To start off, could you please tell us about your legal path? And Sean, why don't we start with you?
Okay, I'm happy to do it. Good evening, everyone. I'm delighted to be able to join you on this extraordinary time that we're in. My legal path is at best an indirect one. There are no straight lines here. I think I'm of a generation where career planning didn't necessarily begin in the cradle. When I graduated from Hamilton, I had absolutely no clue as to how I was going to spend my time. I became a VISTA volunteer working at a civil legal services office in New York, only because a friend of mine, class of '74, had done the same thing and found it rewarding. From there, after a couple of years, I decided I needed to go to law school. I was tired of not having the skills that lawyers have, being only a paralegal. It was a bit frustrating representing clients at administrative hearings, etc. So I did go to law school at the University of Virginia, resolving to return to New York to do that same work as a lawyer. And I did for a couple of years in the South Bronx. That was an extraordinary time during the 1980s, crack epidemic, and it was an exciting and interesting place to be, to say the least. But after a few years, the endless stream of identical problems began to wear on me, and I decided I wanted to spend my time in a way where I could have greater impact. I'd done some impact litigation while I was in the Bronx and found it rewarding. At that time, there was some political change in state government in New York, and the Attorney General's office was hiring. So I became a consumer protection lawyer there, parlaying my litigation skills from Bronx Legal Services to that job. After a year or two, my talents became a little noticed, and I was recruited for a supervisory job in the Charities Bureau in the Attorney General's office, where I found my niche, and I spent 10 years in the Bureau, ultimately as the Bureau Chief, served 3 Attorneys General, and had a very, very satisfying time. However, those of you who do regulatory work who are already lawyers know that you see the worst side of whatever industry you're regulating. And so my 10 years in the Bureau, I saw the worst side of the nonprofit sector: fraud, waste, abuse, sheer stupidity, all of the above, and not what the power of the sector could be. However, during that entire period, I continued to work with a client that I had picked up in my final months in the Bronx, an organizational client, a social services organization that needed somebody to counsel their board. At the time, they had a single storefront office in the Grand Concourse, budget of several $100,000. The office gave me permission, the Attorney General's office gave me permission to continue to work with that client on my own time on a pro bono basis, and I did. And by the time I left the Bureau 10 years later, as the Bureau Chief, that organization had become an organization with a $29 million budget and offices in 25 different locations in the Bronx. And that experience taught me what the power of the nonprofit sector can be to change and transform lives on a significant scale. I eagerly accepted a position at Lawyers Alliance for New York, where we provide civil legal services, business legal services to nonprofit groups, typically using volunteers from large law firms wherever we can. And we provide them with corporate tax, real estate, employment law work, whatever they might need, in order to strengthen those organizations and strengthen their capacity to deliver services. That was where I belonged. It was the job I needed to have and didn't know it. But I only arrived there at a somewhat circuitous route. So I would say that my career path is mostly serendipity. Capping it off, I was at best an indifferent law student, shall we say. When I was at the University of Virginia, I made sure to live as far away from campus as possible out in the Blue Ridge Mountains so that I wouldn't have to breathe the same air all the time. And I was shocked to learn later in my career that one of the things I enjoyed most was counseling and mentoring younger lawyers and helping prepare them for the kind of work that they wanted to do. So when NYU Law School recruited me to create a business law transactions clinic to help prepare lawyers to work in large law firms and for other organizational clients, I jumped at the opportunity and did that for 10 years until my retirement last fall. Well, that's my complete career story. Silvia?
I'll pass it over. Tracee, Beth.
Go ahead. I'll go last.
Okay, thanks, Tracee.
I have to give a disclaimer before I start talking, which is I am not appearing on behalf of the Department of Justice or the Northern District of New York U.S. Attorney's Office tonight, but just as a Hamilton College alum. And I apologize for just appearing by audio, but we had a big power outage and things are a little crazy in Albany. So my legal path started out after going to law school. I clerked for a federal district court judge in Minneapolis for 2 years. And I really wanted to be a litigator. So I went to work at the Securities and Exchange Commission's Enforcement Division, where I was lucky as a young lawyer to be assigned to an investigation of the NASDAQ stock market. And I got to take depositions of senior level NASD officials, which was great experience for a young lawyer. And after that, I went to the Department of Justice Civil Division, where I worked for the Court of Federal Claims and the Federal Circuit. I had some smaller cases that I worked on that were all my own, and I also argued before the Federal Circuit. In addition to that, I worked on claims damages type trials for litigation arising out of the savings and loan disaster, which was not always exciting. I won't tell you that it was, but it was really great training to learn how to deal with huge amounts of documents. And I did depositions and deposed economists, met bank examiners, all of which was great training for what I wanted to do, which was to be a white collar and corruption prosecutor. After that, I went to the DC U.S. Attorney's Office, where I worked in the various sections of the office. As you may know, they handle city court and also federal court. So it is a unique U.S. Attorney's Office, and I rotated through the various parts of the office, appearing in the local Court of Appeals and also in the Federal Court of Appeals, which was a very lucky experience for a young lawyer too. And then going through the various city court rotations before I was assigned to the fraud and public corruption section and invited to stay there as a senior attorney. And that was wonderful work that was really what I had wanted to be able to do. In 2003, my husband and I decided we had 2 young boys by then. They were 4 and 2. And we wanted to move closer to where I had grown up on a farm in the southern Catskill Mountains so that our children could grow up close to my parents and family. So I moved up to the Northern District of New York to the Albany office, and I've been in that office ever since. I have done a lot of cases, and then in 2011, I became a supervisor, and I've held various supervisory positions since then. Tracee, I guess you're up next.
Thanks, Beth. So I think that when I was at Hamilton, I knew I wanted to go to law school. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I think I had probably decided I wanted to be a trial lawyer, but candidly, I didn't really know what that meant. I didn't know if I wanted to be a civil trial lawyer, if I wanted to be a criminal trial lawyer. So I didn't really figure that part out until I went to law school, and I went to American, and I did their criminal justice clinic there, which allowed me to do a semester of defense work and a semester of prosecution work. I decided that the prosecution work was more my speed, and I felt called to do that work. So after graduation, I went directly from law school to the Manhattan DA's office in New York City. And it was amazing work being a city prosecutor. We handled, all sorts of cases. You start in misdemeanor court doing, I think back then there was the turnstile jumping and the shoplifting, but you learn how to litigate cases. And that office I was working under Robert Morgenthau, who was a longtime district attorney there, a person who I hold in very high esteem, rest his soul. And I think he taught us how to make sure that we used our judgment well, and that being a prosecutor wasn't about just getting convictions, but doing justice every day. So I did that for about 5 years, and then decided to make a move to Eastern Tennessee for various reasons that I won't get into. And I went to the U.S. Attorney's Office there and continued to do violent crime work. And as I got more experience, I picked up different kinds of cases. I decided to had the opportunity to go on a detail on an assignment to our executive office for U.S. attorneys and here in Washington. I loved it. It was very different. I did management side personnel work on behalf of the Department of Justice and the U.S. attorneys community. I learned a lot doing that. It gave me some insight on civil litigation and administrative litigation. I liked Washington and remembered how much I loved being there, so I decided to stay. And then I went to the public integrity section in the criminal division of DOJ, and then went to various different shops in the criminal division as a trial attorney, as a deputy chief, as an acting chief, and then I left most recently, earlier this year, as assistant chief in the fraud section in the criminal division. I am now at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, also in Washington, where we handle regulatory enforcement, the enforcement of consumer laws. So for me, it's basically the civil side of some of the fraud work that I was doing at DOJ. So it's a nice change for me. I spent 17 years at the Department of Justice, so it's kind of nice to go to this very young agency after being in one that was more than 100 years old. So that's my career.
Could you tell us what drew you to your legal path? And Tracee, I know you just spoke, but if we can start with you this time.
Sure. I mean, it really, this will sound trite, but I really am a person who believes in a vocation, and I feel that I was called to do this work. I was called to public service, and I felt that I was called to help victims. And the way for me to do that through the things that I was good at was being a prosecutor. And I did that for as long as I could, and it was wonderful. But then I got another call to do something different. And so for me, I'm a person who probably thinks too deeply, if that's a thing. But I kind of believe that you develop your talents and you have to listen carefully to see where you're guided to go. And that's how I ended up being a prosecutor for 22 years.
Beth, would you like to go next?
Sure. When I was trying to decide about going to law school, I thought that I wanted to be a litigator. And when I clerked, I became fascinated with the federal prosecutors because they were the best trial lawyers who appeared in the court regularly. And like Tracee, I also felt a calling to public service and wanted to be part of something that was bigger than myself and about more than just making money. And I wanted to have an opportunity to serve my country. I was very interested in white-collar crime for a lot of different reasons. And so, as I mentioned in my brief background, I really sought out experience that I thought would give me the skills to pursue that path. And it has been very rewarding to be able to have a vocation and to be able to do meaningful work on a daily basis. I don't think many people get paid to go to work and do the right thing, and as Tracee said, to help victims, and all while having really challenging and interesting legal issues and meeting all sorts of people.
Sean? Oh, Sean, I think you're on mute.
Thank you. We're only on this earth for so long, and I'm one who believes that we have an opportunity, if not an obligation, to leave it a better place than when we arrived. So I would say what's motivated my career path, at least after the early years, which were more or less accidental, is following the choices I had to have greater and greater impact along the way. So when I was doing charities work at the Attorney General's office, each project was an opportunity to protect hundreds, if not thousands, of New Yorkers from fraud and abuse and preserve charitable assets, sometimes on a scale of billions of dollars. But it was, as I said before, a negative sort of experience in many ways. Moving to Lawyers Alliance, where we had the opportunity to work with thousands of nonprofits and put 1,000 volunteers to work each year doing 2,000 legal projects for organizations that then served hundreds of thousands of people each, meant the scale of the impact of the work that we could do went far beyond what any of us could achieve as individuals. So I would say what's motivated me from one job to the next has been, how can I have more impact in the next job than I've had so far?
Something that I've found fascinating and also just very encouraging from speaking to you and also listening now what you're saying about your legal path. Did you stick to your plans along the way?
What plans? No, I certainly didn't. You know, I think if there's anything I would want to deliver to this group by way of summary advice, it would be you have to make your plans and you have to prepare yourself and have the experiences and acquire the skills that you think you're going to need. But it's just as important, if not more so, to be open to new possibilities and things that you didn't think you were going to enjoy, you didn't think you were going to have the opportunity to do, you didn't think you were going to make your life's work. Because you may find at the end of the day that those are the things that make you happiest, that give you the most joy, and lead you to where you really belong.
Beth, what about you? Did you stick to your plans along the way?
Well, in one sense, I did stick to my plan because I was able to do the kind of work that I had dreamed of doing when I was in law school. My husband would say I didn't stick to the plan because the plan that I told him is that I'd go work for the government for a few years, that I'd avoid the drudgery of being an associate, and then I would go in private practice and make a lot of money. And he occasionally reminds me that I didn't stick to that part of the plan, but that was because the work was so rewarding. So I guess I would say I pretty much have stuck to the plan, although I know that if you had talked to me as a young lawyer and told me that I would still be working for the department and that I would be in management, I think that I might have been surprised by that, although I didn't really have a plan beyond becoming an assistant U.S. attorney.
And Tracee?
That's a great question. Yes and no. So I think that I definitely had decided that I wanted to be a prosecutor once I towards the end of law school, and I stuck to that. But I think the things that I did as a prosecutor were definitely not the path I thought I was going to go on. I thought I would stay doing violent crime work, doing street crime my whole career, and I kind of switched into public corruption, but then I left public corruption to do some policy work on behalf of the department in our Office of Enforcement Operations. And when I was a deputy chief there, I worked on the Federal Witness Security Program, and I helped to write some of the department's policies on investigations. And I never thought that I would do that sort of work. The work that I did with the Witness Security Program allowed me to go really all over the world, helping other countries establish their witness security programs. And I would have never envisioned that that would have been part of my life. I never thought that I would be okay with not being in a courtroom for 3 or 4 years. And I loved it. I mean, I loved not being in a courtroom for 3 or 4 years. Obviously, I didn't love it so much because now I'm like, I have to get back to court. But it was a really nice break, and it was very meaningful to me that I was able to contribute not just to the department, but really to improving the lives of victims of crime across the world, just from this little tiny job that I had in Washington, D.C.
Was there anything about your Hamilton experience that you think has been particularly helpful throughout your career? And Beth, we can start with you on this one.
So there are 2 things that come to mind. The first is that I was the editor of the newspaper, and I found that to be very useful training. We used to have to stay up all night to do the paper. It was a much more tedious process than it is now, I'm sure. And just the organization involved in that and having to be calm and figuring things out, I thought was very helpful training for life and for career. And also Hamilton's emphasis on writing and communication skills. I'm grateful to Hamilton for making me a better writer. It's something that I've continued to work at my whole career. And what I have seen is that I guess some people are born with a gift of writing, but most people aren't. Most people work on it. It's a skill like any other skill. I don't think it's like athletic skill. I think it's just something that you can work on and improve over time. And I've seen that with people who aren't great writers and work at it and get better than people who might have had more innate ability or interest in doing it. So I'm grateful to Hamilton and for that emphasis on writing, which has become a lifelong goal for me and something that never ends, because you can always be a better writer, and I'm always working on it.
Sean, do you want to go next?
I'm going to underscore what Beth just said about communication skills, both oral and written. It's not a surprise that so many Hamilton graduates become lawyers. The school prepares you to do that in ways that so many other institutions do not. And I say that as someone who has taught law students and worked on them with their drafting problems for clients in the clinic that I taught for 10 years. And when I had a Hamilton grad who was an NYU 3L, I almost immediately knew it because of their writing skills. And those skills, I do believe that you learn the fundamentals of how to write in junior high school, but I agree with Beth that if you have those fundamentals, you can become a much better writer if you have the kind of experience that Hamilton encourages you to have in developing your writing skills. Similarly, your oral communication skills, extremely important if you're a lawyer. And so many students that I've worked with in law school really struggle with those communication skills, whether it's interviewing skills with clients or speaking skills in larger gatherings. Those are things that Hamilton also prepares you for. And that's extremely invaluable to become a superior lawyer.
No, I think that's right. I mean, that's just what Hamilton is known for, is writing and good communication skills. But I'll add one more thing that has helped me. I am a person who is naturally introverted. And I think most people who know me would not think that, but I am. And so it takes a lot of my energy all week during the work week to be on and to be extroverted. That is something that I learned how to do at Hamilton. So I worked at the Career Center, was my work study job. And I got to interact with a lot of the alums who would come in, not the Career Center, I'm sorry, it's Communications and Development. And so I got to interact with a lot of the alums who came in and out, and I would have to sit and talk to them. And it was always very uncomfortable because I'm an introvert. And I learned as part of that work study job that these people are kind enough to spend the time to talk to me and to share experiences with me and to help me learn. In return, I have to be a person who talks back in order to get something from the conversation, right? You tell your kids a conversation is one person talking, one person not talking, then the other person talking, and then you not talking, right? And so for me, going to all of these kind of social events during college, when you're in law school, you have to go to the same kind of social events, and then you are in your office and you have to interact with other people, and then you have to meet your witnesses and your experts and people that you need to interact with just as a lawyer who you have to conduct interviews. And if I didn't have that experience, I'm not sure I would have been successful at my job, because I had to learn very early, okay, it's okay to be extroverted 5 days a week, and then you can take a nap when you get home on Friday and get re-energized. And it's not about being someone's different, but I learned that it was about prioritizing different parts of your personality in order to achieve whatever ends you're trying to do. So that's what I learned the most.
What advice would you give a current student or a young lawyer who's considering a career in public service or in government? Sean, let's start with you on this one.
So a few things, some of which we've already covered, but I'll put them back together now. First of all, plan, of course. Anticipate where you'd like to be in 5, 10, 15 years, if you can. Think about what kinds of skills you're going to need to acquire to pursue that path, and where you're going to need to work or where you ought to work in order to acquire those skills. Network, make connections, make the most of your Hamilton College connections for sure, but other connections. No job ever walked into my office and presented itself to me. I had to go out and get it, and that's going to be the case for you as well. And so that networking is going to be critical. And then finally, as I said before, but very importantly, be open to the unexpected. Keep yourself open to experiences and to possibilities that you may not have planned for.
Tracee?
Yeah, I think really the best advice for is to try to do as many internships and externships, volunteer opportunities you can. If you're interested, if you are a law student and you are interested in working at DOJ, at least in the Washington office, I would always tell students for the criminal division is have some sort of public service on your resume, because we get, 200 resumes of equally qualified people. So at some point we have to find a way to cull through them. And for me, I would go through and say, all right, who's got public service on their resume? And people would always ask, well, does that mean you would say no to someone who has legal aid? No, that is the beginning of public service, is legal aid, in my opinion. So it doesn't matter what it is, but a demonstrated commitment to helping others is what I would look for on a resume when I was doing hiring for DOJ.
And Beth?
So I think it's really important to take the time to figure out why you think that you want to do this work and what exactly you want to do. And I know that sounds like obvious advice, but grappling with what you really enjoy doing and what you're good at will help you choose the right path. And a lot of people don't take the time to think through those issues about how they want to be spending their days. And I think if you take the time to do that up front, you'll have a much more rewarding career. But along the same lines, I have another piece of obvious advice, which is that you have to constantly be checking whether you're satisfied with what you're doing. And as lawyers, particularly lawyers often have long hours, and so you're just kind of going through the days and the weeks and months and the years, and time can pass by, and before you know it, you're kind of drifting along. And so I think it's important that you make a commitment to yourself, no matter what you decide to do, to on a regular basis, at least an annual basis, to go over what you're doing, what you like about it, what you don't like about it, so that you can think about whether you ought to be trying to make a change to try to find a new job or try something else out, or whether you just need to be emphasizing some part of your job that you like doing more. What could you do to expand that part of the job? I think sometimes we're a little too passive about what we're doing day to day, and it's easy for all of that to get lost in just the pressing, what seems urgent of the day-to-day tasks.
That's all really great advice. I mean, I had written it down when we met last week, and I wrote it down again. This is great advice for a young lawyer. At this time, we should open it up to audience questions.
Hey everyone, it's Mike. I'm hoping I can ask one or two before we kick it off, and thank you guys all so much for doing this. It's been great. The first one I have is, what challenges do you think have been particularly notable? I mean, obviously we're in a very charged political climate, a lot of uncertainty, upheaval recently, and maybe Tracee and Beth, you can speak to this, with respect to your current positions, and Sean, you may have had some experience with it, in your government related positions in the past, but what challenges do you think, this current environment and environments like it in the past, have posed for a lawyer in, who's doing government work?
I can start with that. And I've only been at my new agency for 3 months, so I don't have much to contribute on that. But you know, one of the things about it really depends on your position in the department, in your agency. For at least in my experience, when I was a supervisor, the changes by administration can be. It's always been about it's been about fighting crime, but the priorities would shift. And so it doesn't generally, in my experience, I never really felt that when I was on the line. You know, you'd get a new push to do a certain kind of cases, but my experience at DOJ has always been that there's so many I mean, it's a career agency with so many career attorneys and staff people that the politics never really mattered. I mean, I think there are probably people in the office who would say, like, who's the Attorney General again? Simply because it's just not part of our day-to-day. You know, the day-to-day is working on the cases that you're assigned, and that's the most important thing.
Sean?
I'm
Yeah,
actually,
Beth.
go ahead, Sean.
Okay, is that Beth? Beth, go ahead, you go first.
Oh, well, I was just going to say that I'm going to pass on the question because I was instructed that I'm not supposed to talk about the department.
Very good. Very discreet. So I envy Tracee because I had a very different experience in the government arena. And I think working in state government directly for an elected official is a bit different, I think, than the large federal machine. And the higher up the food chain you advance, the more you feel it. I said I had the privilege to serve 3 attorneys general. 2 of them were Democrats, 1 was a Republican. I was hired by Bob Abrams, a Democrat. I was promoted to be the bureau chief by Dennis Vacco, a Republican. There's almost nobody else that can say that. Life in the political world and working directly for an elected official at the state level is an exercise in politics. And you have to realize that you're going to have to navigate that in order to continue to do what's right if you're working for someone whose values you don't necessarily embrace. And that can be quite a challenge. When I finally did leave the Attorney General's office, what motivated me in part on the timing, at least, was I was not going to go through another election. I had enough of that. So I think if you are considering government work, I think you should consider carefully the places where you might work and what those places are like and how much political influence there is over the work itself and whether you can really work successfully in that kind of an environment, because it does take a certain temperament. You have to have a certain thickness of your hide.
Great, thank you. And my just second one is, you each talked about, to some extent, clinics when you were at law school, and Sean, you know, as a professor. And I know we've got a bunch of current students on, some law students. Maybe you could talk a little bit about, you know, the value you saw in the clinic experience, and you know whether that's something you'd recommend for law students now.
Who wants to go first? All right, I'll take it.
I will.
Go ahead, Beth. Go ahead.
Oh, well, I actually did work at a clinic, but it wasn't an official law school class clinic at the University of Michigan, a domestic violence clinic. And I thought that was a wonderful experience to actually work with real people on meaningful issues and to make a difference in people's lives. And to actually, you know, I went to court and represented someone. So I would absolutely urge people to try to get those kinds of experiences. I mean, I loved law school. I know Sean wasn't as engaged, didn't like it as much apparently, but I loved it. But the intellectual pursuit of the law that you do at law school is very different than the actual practice of law. And I think that they're both rewarding in their own ways, but the earlier that you can find out what the practice of law is like, the better for you to help you figure out what it is you want to do.
So one of the reasons why I didn't think law school was such a wonderful experience was in the antediluvian times when I went to law school, there was no clinical program at the University of Virginia. They had just hired their very first full-time clinical faculty member the year I started. And the clinical offerings, formal clinical offerings for credit, were virtually non-existent. The extracurricular activities that I engaged in, particularly working in the local legal aid program, were the most rewarding things I did in law school. But I didn't realize what the absence of a clinical education meant until I started teaching law school and realized that students can get a wealth of experience and begin to make choices that one wouldn't be able to make without the clinical opportunities, just by taking a variety of clinics if you can and exposing yourself to different clinical experiences. Not only will it help prepare you for what you want to do, it'll help you decide what you want to do. So it'll surprise no one here that I've drunk the Kool-Aid, but I'd encourage those who are considering going to law school to make the most of their clinical opportunities.
I 100% agree. I did half of the reason why I chose American University for law school was for their criminal clinic. It's phenomenal. It continues to be phenomenal. I also am an adjunct at American, so I have a little bit of bias, but I think it's a phenomenal program. It is very intense. I still use to this day, this is a fact, the order of proof that they taught us how to do in my criminal clinic for prosecution on trials. We prosecuted up in Montgomery County. I still use that same template. It's still my order of proof. Now it's typed out. It used to be on paper, but that's the same one I've been using now for more than 20 years. It's a great opportunity. If you have the opportunity to do it in law school, I highly recommend it.
Thank you.
I think we're ready to move to questions from the audience. John, you have your hand raised. Do you still have a question?
I do. So I'm now in nonprofit law on the other side of most of these people because I sue the agencies of the federal government. But I have to say that the key, some of the questions have been asked. I applied for the U.S. attorneys in Philly and in New York, which are very high bars to pass. But they kept asking me about the Federalist Society that I had been in at the time, which I think was a problem. But the real thing about prosecutors and defense attorneys is there's almost no jury trials anymore. You pretty much have to go where these people went if you ever want to talk to a jury. And I was fortunate. I went into where Beth's husband wanted her to go in order to make money. And I fell in with defense attorneys at high-end firms who went to trial. And so I had that trial experience, but it's very rare. If you're at one of the top law firms, you almost never get trial experience. The only way you get them is you go to the clinics as soon as you can when you're a young lawyer. Then you were either a prosecutor or you're a defense attorney, or you go to the nonprofits because they want to prove a point. They do cause type litigation. And so there's a little fight amongst lawyers about trial lawyers and corporate lawyers. And the corporate lawyers think we're all cowboys because we're out there, talking to juries and doing things that they're like, oh, but if the plan is right, everything is fine. And they never want to go to court. And everything is, if we got it right in this piece of paper, everything will be well. And there is a big sort of, I would say, a divide amongst the law about where you want to go. If you like that, corporate law is fine. But as I would say, and I bet everyone on this panel would say, if you want to be a real lawyer, you have got to go into court and you've got to talk to juries and you've got to talk to judges. And in order to do that nowadays, you can't go into the big firms. You can maybe go in for a year or two and get certain type of what I'll call, here's how we do all of our motions to stop us from getting to trial. But if you want to go to trial, you got to be a prosecutor, you got to be a defense attorney, you got to be a plaintiff's attorney, or you have to be in a nonprofit. But I thought everything here was absolutely true that I heard. And I will say this, I knew Beth when she was in college. I thought she was too nice to be a prosecutor, but she's been a great prosecutor. So it apparently does not require a sour mien. So I'll sign off now, but it was really great.
It's very funny. Thank you, John. I get that a lot. Actually, people are surprised to learn I'm a prosecutor, and I never really understand why people think you can't be kind and be a prosecutor.
Great, thank you. We've got a few more hands raised. Ed Watkins, do you want to jump in? Ed, I'm sorry, you're muted.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Class of 74, so I can call Sean a young man.
Thank you.
41 years working for the state of New York, recently retired. Very happy to be retired now. I just want to know if anyone on the panel or anyone on the call had the pleasure, as I had, of having to prosecute a classmate, a member of the I'll call it administration faculty, or a Hamilton parent.
No, although I did prosecute a Hamilton alum.
I might know the one you prosecuted.
His friends came to court to support him.
Yeah, you just never know.
Yeah.
You know, I was very surprised when the classmate's name appeared. At the time, I was in head of doing child daycare enforcement for the state, and I said, this name is awfully familiar, and went to the class yearbook, and sure, it was the person, so I handed that one off, but worked on the strategy. And then one time, had to bring an action against the gentleman who was head of the Parents Fund, and also had a matter involving a professor's wife. So you never know. Surprisingly, I only ever had one case where the lawyer on the other side was a Hamilton grad. One of the best interns I ever had, though, was a Hamilton student. And his writing and his speaking were excellent.
Wonderful, thank you, Ed. We have also a question from Ella. Ella, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, hi. I was just wondering, because as an undergrad, I'm a junior this year, and I found it kind of hard to get experience in the legal field as an undergrad when I'm competing with the law students. So Sean, I don't know if you can speak to this because you weren't sure what you were doing, but Tracee or Beth, if you have any advice on how to get involved, like it's not a matter of being paid, obviously, it's just wanting the experience and kind of having trouble getting that experience.
So when I was at the public integrity section, we started a program for the Washington semester kids, so that some of them could come and intern in my office. As far as I know, that still exists, even after I left. I know it exists after I left the program, but the contact information is in the hands of Hamilton College on who to call. They love Hamilton College students, so the Washington program, I personally participated in the Washington program. I think it's phenomenal. If you have the ability to do that, I urge you to do that. It's even, you know, Hamilton is its own little personal network, but the DC program folks are our own little network. And so that is one way. And so I've had students, even when I was at our Office of Enforcement Operations and in the fraud section, I think I've had Hamilton College students come in and do kind of a paralegal internship in the criminal division. So definitely the contact information is there. So check with the right people. And I'm sure I can find whoever that person, I don't remember who I was talking to at Hamilton, but the contact is Danny Foster, danny.foster@usdoj.gov. And he always takes at least one or two Hamilton students and he's been doing that since 2012. And he's always been impressed with them. So that's one way.
Our office actually hires college students, but they work doing clerical work, but it's an opportunity to be in the office, and we don't get that many applicants. So keep an eye out. That's on, you can go on our website to see about hiring information, but you can keep an eye out there too.
Most of the public, nonprofit, public interest legal organizations around the country, in New York included, will take on interns during the school year, during that winter break period for a few weeks, and also in the summertime. They typically can't afford to pay you, so it'll be for the experience. But those positions, those volunteer positions, are not always that competitive. At Lawyers Alliance, we always used to have 2 or 3 college students each summer and 1 or 2 each midwinter break. And they would do mostly clerical work, but they would get a sense for what the organization did and would get to sit in on client interviews and that sort of thing. So I think it's an invaluable experience for the students. I think if you present yourself at places where you think you might want to work, that's an option that might work out for you.
I'll jump in too just quickly on behalf of the Career Center. So any alumni who have opportunities that they want to share with students, whether they be formal internships or what we call SNAP internships, kind of short-term internship related experiences, and or job shadowing, please feel free to reach out to me directly and I can put you in touch with the folks in the Career Center to help connect you to do that. And for students who want to get experience, if you haven't been to the Career Center, please do so. Our advisors are available and happy to help talk you through these processes and to connect you with programs that we offer to do exactly what you were asking about, Ella. So feel free to be in touch with me if I can be helpful to anyone involved.
And Ella, I felt the same thing when I was a sophomore and a junior in college. And what I ended up finding was that there are opportunities in municipal government work, which I hadn't considered until it was time to apply, and ended up being really valuable experience. And also district attorney's offices. I interned, my family's from Lexington, Kentucky, so that, you know, they had a law student program and a college student program. Maybe your local DA has something similar if that's something you're interested in.
Are there any other questions in the room? I don't see any hands raised. So I just want to say thank you to everyone for being here tonight, to our panelists and our moderator and our volunteers, and to the whole audience for folks for joining us tonight. This was really a wonderful event. We really appreciate you taking the time to come and join us. I know I'll stick around for a few more minutes, and the panelists and speakers are welcome to stick around for a few more too if folks have individual questions they'd like to ask. But again, thank you so much, and please join us for more events to come in the next several months. So thank you and be safe.
Tracee, can I ask you a quick question? Hi, I'm Molly. I'm a junior. I was actually supposed to be in DC in January. However, that is not happening anymore. So I will be here. So that's not bad. I'm happy to stay on the Hill. But obviously now we won't get the opportunity to be in DC and meet all the exciting Hamilton people. Do you have any suggestions on what I can do to try to make some of that experience happen here on the Hill, or anywhere you think I should like reach out to, or any advice?
Yeah, honestly, the best way to kind of, while you may not get the hands-on experience that you were expecting in the Washington program, I'm a big believer. You know, I explained to you guys how I'm an introvert at nature, but life is about being an extrovert sometimes. So what I would recommend for you is to go through the alumni directory, find people that are interested in it, who are doing the work, who have agreed to talk to students, which is most everyone, and are doing the work that you might be interested in doing, particularly in Washington. I love informational interviews. I probably do an informational interview every week for between Hamilton and my law school. I can't imagine that there's an alum who wouldn't talk to you about their experience and And so I think that's the best way to do it, is to try to make those connections. And particularly now, you don't have to do it over the phone. We can Zoom and do all that stuff. I'd be happy to do a one-on-one with you, and we can talk about some of the things that you're interested in. Everybody has 20 minutes or 30 minutes for you. So that's what I would do.
Thank you.
This is Beth. I'd be happy to talk to you too.
Thank you so much. I have a midterm I have to get back to, but thank you, everyone.
Good luck.